everybody, my name is Elijah. Welcome back to another video, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the Core i5 from Intel. Now I'm going to be talking about all of the Core i5s that have been built to rival Ryzen, and I'm going to be talking about the Ryzen 5s in today's video. So there have been plenty of Ryzen 5s. Ryzen started off on the Zen architecture, and the first Ryzen 5 that AMD ever released was the AMD Ryzen 5 1600. Then they also had the 1600X and then the 1400 and 1500X, which I talked about in my last video. And both of these CPUs were very flaky. A lot of the hype for AMD was kind of fizzled out because of their last FX series of CPUs, and basically nobody really wanted to buy these, and well, not nobody, a lot of people did buy these chips, but with how flaky they were with RAM speeds, a lot of people felt let down. And then the release of Zen Plus. Zen Plus was a 12 nanometer refresh from the original 14 nanometer process of the Zen architecture, and these chips brought in the Ryzen 5 2600, 2600X, 2700, 2700X, and I think the Ryzen 3 2200G and the 2300 or 2100. And it was not that much better. The nanometer refresh, 12 nanometer refresh, was a little bit better than over the 14 nanometer, but not too much has changed. And with this launch also came the Ryzen 5 1600AF, which is currently the CPU that I'm using in my build. 6 cores, 12 threads. And then came Zen 2. Everybody thought it was going to be very revolutionary. It was built on a 12 nanometer process, but they changed the core layout to using 2 core dies instead of a single core die. So if there is, say, 6 cores, there would be 3 dies instead of having 6. And this brought great gaming performance. It was actually finally a good competitor for Intel. And with Zen 3A came 2 brand new processors, which was the Ryzen 9 series processors. Ryzen 9 3900X and the AMD Ryzen 3950X. Just going over all of this, just a little bit of backstory for the AMD Ryzen side. And for the Ryzen chips I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to be talking about the 1600, the 2600, and 1600AF, because they're basically the same chip, and the 3600, and the 3500, but it's only just going to be a little bit because I've already done a separate video on it. If you want to see that video, click right when the pop-up comes up. And yeah, let's talk about, also, wait, no, never mind. Also, the 5600X came out this year, and that absolutely demolished Intel. So on the Intel side of the spectrum, you have the i5, and starting with the earliest generation that rivaled Ryzen was the i5 7600K, which was a 4-core processor that was running at 91 watts. Which is a lot higher than the advertised 65-watt TDP of the AMD Ryzen 5 1600. And this processor, like I said, was 4 cores, but it did not enable hyper-threading, so it was only 4 threads. This chip is overclockable, but not all forms of it was. There was an i5 7400, which was non-overclockable, 4-core, 4-thread, and then just the base model i5 7600, which is not overclockable. That is one thing that AMD has always had over Intel, is unlocked multipliers, which is one thing that I am very happy for with running my AMD CPU, because I am currently clocked at 4 gigahertz. So the next CPU on our list is the i5 8600K that still uses the LGA 1151 socket. Now this is a 95-watt TDP, which is still very high compared to the 65-watt TDP Ryzen. But on the Ryzen spectrum of this generation is the 2600, which is a 6-core, 12-thread CPU that I think is clocked at 3.9 gigahertz boost. And this bad boy does have pretty good gaming performance, nowhere near as good as the 8600K, which he expected. Ryzen was not meant to be a competitor. Well, it was meant to be a competitor, but they still hadn't gotten down everything that they needed to beat Intel. But this is on a 12 nanometer process instead of Intel's measly 14 nanometer process. And like I said, this i5 was a 6-core, but only 6 threads. And right now you can get it for around $228, which is fine, I guess. Because LGA 1151 boards are a little bit cheaper than like LGA 1200. And I think the Core i5 10600K, which I'll be talking about, is around the same price, like $2 cheaper. So for the next processor on Intel's side, we have the 9600K. This CPU is, I think, 6 cores, 6 threads, and right now you can get this chip for around $200, not too bad, but the wattage is still 95 watts, which, like I've said before, is still higher than the advertised wattage of 65 on the AMD side. Starting to sound like a broken record. Now, the AMD Ryzen 5 3600, I think, was released as $200, and so was this chip. But the AMD Ryzen 5 has multi-threading, or what Intel calls hyper-threading, on their chip. And this is where AMD really started to step up their game and show that they are a competitor. With the Ryzen 5 either tying or being a little bit short of the i5 9600K in most applications, this, like I said before, is really what showed people that AMD is a competitor. And with the pricing, it was kind of hard to beat. And never forget what I said, the launch price. This processor's launch price was, I think, $200 or $50 or $300. So it was definitely a premium over the Ryzen 5. And on our next CPU, we have the i5 10600K. Now, this CPU comes in at a whopping $27, and it boosts up to 4.8 gigahertz, which you can overclock even faster, but is at 125 watts. Like I said, that's 5 watts less than double of what the Ryzen 5 will get you. Now, this is a 6-core and, for the first time in a while, 6-thread processor coming from Intel. Now, this for a while was the top dog until AMD came out with the AMD Ryzen 5 5600X. Now, right now, these things are very hard to get. Wait a darn minute. These things are very hard to get, and makes sense because, you know, with the pandemic and everything, and the amount of freaking scalpers. But the AMD Ryzen 5 5600X was on a whole new architecture with 4-core layouts. And this CPU, I'm actually looking at it now. Now, this is a little bit over the advertised price. This is $100 over the advertised price. Or no, sorry, $50 over the advertised price of $250. But right now, I'm looking on Amazon right now. You can get one for around $300 starting March 26th. So that's great. But this was on their new layout that has four core CCXs or core dies, and that's what was supposed to go up against the Core i5. But this thing